I've seen towns explode into cities. I've seen towns with their hearts ripped out. Every town has its own tales of triumph and catastrophe. All of them face challenges. As a geographer, I believe that towns are the communities of the future. Towns will be the places we want to live.
By 2030, a staggering 92% of us will be living the urban life. Congested cities sprawl across our map. But cities don't have all the answers. I believe we need to fall back in love with the places that first quickened our pulses. Towns. Smaller than a city, more intimate, much greener, more surprising. Towns are where we learned to be urban. They are the building blocks of our civilization. Coastal towns, market towns, river towns, industrial towns. Collectively, they bind our land together. This is the story of towns, but it's also our story, where we came from, how we live, and where we might be going.
Is the mouth of the most powerful river in Britain. The River Tay is a giant among waterways, Scotland's Amazon.
More than 15 million cubic metres of water pours from the Tay into the sea every day. That's as much water as the River Thames and the Severn combined.
Perth is here because of this river.
Perth's location is spectacular. It sits right at the gateway to the Highlands. Over there are the Grampian Mountains, soaring like a wall from the River Tay's floodplain.
12,000 years ago, when the last of the Ice Age glaciers were disappearing into those mountains, meltwater flushed fantastic amounts of sand and gravel down to the lowlands, where it laid down the thick bed of material the Tay powers through today. At Perth, you'd have to dig down something like 45 metres before you hit solid rock.
"800 years ago, this was the first point where the river could be bridged. It was also the upper limit of navigation. Ships could sail up the river from the North Sea and unload their cargoes 25 miles inland. They couldn't get any further.
Right here, where the river was narrow enough to be bridged, yet deep enough to take ships, a town was born.
Perth is celebrating. It's celebrating the 800th anniversary of a document. This town was granted a royal borough charter in 1210 by King William the Lion. So for the last 800 years, it's been a royal town. But Perth thinks it should be a city. This is a place which survived being attacked by Robert the Bruce. Its castle was swept away by catastrophic floods. A king, King James I of Scotland, was murdered within Perth's walls. Perth thinks it has the history to be a city, and it has the fire in its belly to prove it. So should it stay a town or become a city? As part of these 800th anniversary celebrations, images from its past are being projected onto the City Hall.
They're showing images of Perth from the past and the present. They're images everybody's recognising, so lots of folk are stopping to admire them on the way past. They're images that make Perth feel proud of itself, make it feel bigger, perhaps, than it really is.
Tonight marks the culmination of a year of events designed to put Perth firmly back on the map. But to put it back on the map as a city, not as a town. But what do the people think? Do the local inhabitants think Perth is a town or a city?
Is it a city? Well, officially not yet, but I think it should be. And I think most other people think it should be as well.
I'd say it's a city more than a town. I'd compare it to a place like Dundee, which is a city.
Yeah, it's got a lot of history. Definitely should be a city.
I think it's got a city feel to it.
Perth is definitely a city.
We have a cathedral. We're a city.
Of course it's a city.
Not a town.
Oh dear. What am I doing here, making a series on towns, if Perth really is a city? In 1975, Perth officially lost the right to call itself a city. Nearby Dundee was chosen as the administrative centre of the region, and Perth lost out. It became an ex-city. It was relegated, left out in the cold.
Behind all the buildings, behind all the civic furniture that makes up a town, there are the inhabitants, the people, and people know the status of their community. They know where it fits on the map. Perth's demotion from city status removed it from the map of British cities, and for many, putting Perth back on that map is a matter of honour.
The perception that cities are the urban elite is an old one. To Aristotle, people congregated in cities to live the good life. Cities share the same Latin root as civilization, and to this day there's a lingering suggestion that everything outside the orbit of the city is uncivilized. The most recent Scottish town to win city status was Stirling in 2002. That Stirling is Perth's neighbour and occasional rival made Perth's official designation as a town all the more difficult to bear. To mark the Queen's Diamond Jubilee, Her Majesty will create one new city in the UK. But will it be Perth? Other towns are queuing up to enter the contest. From Luton, Colchester and Blackpool to Milton Keynes and Croydon, they all want city status. There are no special rights conferred by city status, no financial benefits or cultural clout. It's about acknowledgement of scale, taking a seat at the urban high table. It's all about image.
Perth was christened the Fair City by fans of Sir Walter Scott's novel, The Fair Maid of Perth, written in the 1820s. And this is the Fair Maid's house. It's one of the oldest buildings in Perth, and it's currently enjoying a major restoration. But it's not the first time it's been given a makeover. This tower was added to make the building conform more closely with the Fair Maid's house in the book. Every building tells a story, and this story is all about making it a city.
So as long ago as the 19th century, this town's PR department was busy image building. Throughout history, Perth has used every trick in the book to prove its city status. It started calling itself a city long before Scott put pen to paper. The town found that the best way to become a city was just to call itself that, over and over again, on the grounds that no one...
But it was never officially granted city status. Perth may have been a royal borough. It may have been described in print as the Fair City, but it didn't get the documentation. Perth was a monarch without a crown.
Historically in Britain, if you had a cathedral, you were considered a city. Today, that's not the case. Only the ruling monarch can grant city status, and as yet, Her Majesty hasn't given Perth the nod. In every town, if you look into the street names, you can peel back layers of history. Old street names have meaning. They reveal a town's first markets, tradesmen. They take you back to a town's reason for being. And in Perth, those street names reveal something extraordinary. A town born from water.
Medieval Perth had two main streets. High Street, which still exists, I'm standing on it now, and South Street, which ran parallel. It's just over there, behind the shops. There were also a number of crossway streets known as gates. There were town walls pierced at a number of points by entrances or ports. And encircling the town walls, there was the town lade, a canal.
Unlike any other town in Britain, Perth had a medieval moat that ran around it, which was part mill race, part canal. It defined the town. Hemmed in between the Lade and the Tay, parts of Perth would have once looked like a whitewater version of Venice. Fed through a sluice further up the River Armand, the Lade waterway was a defensive measure, and vitally for Perth's survival, it was also the source of power for the town's mills. And I should be able to find the site of Perth's old mills by tracing the route of the Lade today.
This is Canal Street. A clue, isn't it? It still feels like the edge of town.
And it's not the only clue to the town's history either. I'm starting to notice street names that recall leatherworking, tanneries, waterways, and farmers' markets. Each name a window on a medieval street scene.
These alleyways, or vennels as they're known in Perth, were originally wide enough to take a horse and cart. They would have been lined with makeshift stalls and shops, which were eventually replaced by more permanent stone structures, narrowing the vennel. This one, Flesher's Vennel, was known for its butchers.
Tracing the route of the old town Lade, I'm beginning to realise that it wasn't just a practical waterway. It delimited the vital organs of the town. The bits of the town which really mattered were all inside the Lade.
It's as if the entire course of the canal has been tarmacked over. These street names show exactly where the Lade once ran.
And further along the road, it finally enters Mill Street.
In the centre of town, the Lade reached the city mills. This is where the people of Perth ground their grain, using barley and wheat from the fertile farmland that ran for miles beyond all these walls and streets. For the God-fearing people of Perth, fishes may have come from the Tay, but the loaves were courtesy of the Lade.
All towns have an identity. The buildings and streets, the stone and brick, cast iron, concrete and glass, that's what you see when you look around. But they're really just the clothes. The soul of a town, its identity, the place it thinks it is less obvious, less visible. And Perth has an identity crisis. It's grown used to thinking big. It's been nurtured by the biggest river in the land. It has a big history. No wonder it thinks it's a city. Perth has a population of 45,000, so it's not enormous by any means. But I think this town is definitely trying to get noticed.
It seems to me that Perth is in the midst of an episode of extraordinary change. It's the very evident way that the physical fabric of the town is being reinvented.
There's this dramatic new concert hall, head-turning urban sculptures. This town is working hard at making the grade. But is there something missing?
Most cities have a defining central space. Think of Trafalgar Square, Times Square in New York, or St. Peter's Square in Rome. Somewhere where people can gather on important occasions.
Walk around Perth and you won't find that central space. It's just not here.
Or is it? This is the old City Hall, built by the Edwardians in that long, sunny afternoon between the glories of the Victorian Age and the outbreak of the First World War.
Here, carved in stone, is the pride, the prosperity of an empire. These Ionic columns, the cornices, the cherubs, the garlands, are cues from ancient Greece. Here's a temple of culture, an acropolis on the Tay.
The hall opened in 1911, and throughout the 20th century it was the venue for Perth's concerts, dances, rock bands. Everyone played here, from The Who to Jerry and the Pacemakers. For many in the town, it's a hall of memories, the place they saw their first gig, where they met that boy or girl they went on to marry.
But there's a plan to knock it down. Is it true that you're planning to knock down the City Hall?
Yes, we are actually. The council is now considering that very seriously. The building has been empty for the last 5 years, and we failed to find a good use for the building. And so we're now saying, should we demolish it? And instead of replacing it with another building, actually create a civic square, a piazza in the heart of Perth.
And why do you want to knock it down? Are there not any other places available in Perth to create this central square?
Perth, quite unusually for Scottish towns, has a gridiron street pattern. And there's actually no area of open space apart from the graveyard. Our thought was that we should look at creating a square right in the heart of Perth, something it lacked. One option that we did look at was partial demolition. The front of it, I call the Brandenburg Gate, with the columns and the quite severe architecture and those dreadful gnomes, I think, on the top of it.
Cherubs, aren't they?
I think they're gnomes, actually.
Oh, really?
I think the architect got the scale wrong. Far too big and ugly. But we did say, well, could you actually keep that bit of it and demolish the rest and turn the front into a restaurant or a tourist office or something? But I think on balance we felt it may be better all go. And the interesting thing was, if you go back to the 1860 Ordnance Survey map, this was a public square. There was a very small city hall, but the area around the kirk was the flesh market, the meat market. We then looked more broadly to say, what is the value of that building to Perth as opposed to the value of the space to Perth? If you could use that as a centre for fairs, for exhibitions, open-air concerts, it's big enough, for example, to have a curling rink in it. You could have a genuine ice rink here in the winter. Have one today, couldn't you?
Great fun, yeah.
And curling, have the Christmas tree there. To have one place that was the focus of the city, I think would be very exciting.
I need a walk around to think this one through. The idea of a modern city space is really attractive, but at what expense to the character of Perth, the town? Tight up against the back of City Hall stands Perth's oldest building, St John's Kirk. First mentioned in royal documents of 1128, the kirk used to be the most prominent landmark in town.
Before it was encroached upon by more modern buildings, St John's was visible for miles around. Rising from its high ground, it was the symbol of this town, so much so that Perth was sometimes known as St John's Town.
The name may not have stuck for the town, but it's still the name of Perth's football team, St Johnstone. Walking around the kirk today, it looks as if it's sinking into the ground, as if it's shrunk with age, lost the stature of its youth.
Something rather odd has happened to the church's main west door. It's shorter than it should be, like a lift stuck between two floors. If St John's once stood proud on its high ground, it doesn't command quite the same position now.
The answer lie beneath these paving stones. Here in the centre of Perth, there are thousands of bodies beneath my feet.
This was the church's graveyard for 500 years. When the burials began to mount up, so did the ground. When the congregation below the surface began to impede access for those above, it was time to find another burial ground.
New urban landmarks appear through the centuries. The church lost its prominence as a central meeting place to the City Hall, and now it's the prominence of the City Hall which hangs in the balance. I'm sure the father of town planning, Patrick Geddes, would have had an opinion on the subject. Geddes was a Perthshire man with visionary ideas. He wrote in 1910, "Civic architecture and town planning are expressions of local history, of civic and national changes and contrasts of mind. Each generation must make its own contribution in its own characteristic way." So it's up to the people of Perth to decide what Perth should look like. City Hall or no City Hall? That is the question. To get a better view of the controversial piazza, I'm going up the church tower. As Perth's most historic building, and as part of its bid for city status, the Kirk's interior is currently being renovated at a cost of almost £3 million. It was in this church in 1559 that John Knox, the Scottish clergyman and Protestant reformer, delivered a fiery sermon raging against the sin of idolatry. It was the speech that launched the Reformation in Scotland, revolutionising religious practice throughout the land. Another big historical event that Perth can claim as its own. Right outside today, another radical reformation could be about to take place.
Now I'm up here, I can see what Roland means. Take out the City Hall and you create a magnificent square. And the plan would have it lined with cafe tables, couples strolling arm in arm. But, there's always a but. I do wonder whether the people of Perth would see this new square as a focal point or as a gaping void. It's freezing up here today. There's snow on the mountains and there's an icy wind cutting across the rooftops. You create a big open space here, it's going to be like walking across a tract of the Siberian tundra on a very bad day. Now, Perth is an intimate town. The buildings huddle together for companionship and warmth. The buildings are separated by narrow alleys, vennels, crooked streets. Everything's close packed, very friendly. You create a vast open space in the middle of a town like this, and it just feels out of place. I don't know, my feeling is that to put an Italian piazza here in Perth is rather like building a centrally heated shopping mall in the Sahara. I don't really think it should be knocked down.
In the past, rivers were vital arteries of trade and communication. They could be harnessed to power mills, they could be fished for food and used for irrigation, drinking water, and a multitude of industrial purposes. The bigger the river, the more it had to offer, and the Tay is a big river, the biggest river in Britain.
There's something more fundamental though, something that goes right to the soul of this town.
Perth has always existed at the whim of this mighty river, the river that brought it here in the first place. The Tay is Perth's alter ego, the other half of its psyche, the untamed life force that brought it into being, the monster that rises from its lair to wreak havoc. It's like balancing on a gigantic, muscled, very scary river. Catastrophic floods have swept away bridges, castles, property and people. Perth has always been a flood town.
In January 1993, the river burst its flood banks and poured through the town. 2,000 cubic metres per second of water thundered under the bridges and over the streets. It was one of the most severe floods in Perth's history. The worst affected area was North Muirton, a Perth housing scheme built on the floodplain.
More than 400 people were evacuated from houses on Perth's North Muirton estate last night. At one point, the Army and Navy were called in to help.
Like New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, it was those who are less well off who were hit hardest. 1,500 houses in Perth were seriously affected by the floodwater. 900 of those were in North Muirton. £40 million worth of damage was caused in just one weekend. It was a disastrous time for the town. After the floods of 1993, Perth's relationship with the Tay changed forever. Never again would the river be allowed to terrorise this town. £25 million was poured into a high-tech flood defence system. Now, an impressive 81 floodgates, 7 pumping stations, plus miles of embankments, holding ponds and strategic flood areas are in place to protect the town. It's a flood defence system to match any in the world. And this morning, they're putting it to the test. If a flood is on its way, the flood defence team get only a few hours' warning to close the gates and protect the town. This is one of Perth's best-kept secrets, a feat of engineering and ingenuity.
Closing up all the bulkheads in a ship.
Pretty much, yeah.
Door slamming exercise.
Yeah.
How high does the water have to rise before it goes over the top of your defences?
The whole design of the system is based on the 1814 flood, which is the worst inundation that Perth has ever had. We've got that plus half a metre is built in for climate change and another 300 to 400 millimetres for freeboard, which is basically wave action, etc. So hopefully that we'd never actually be in a situation where the defences would be overtopped.
It's Perth's unique location that makes it so vulnerable. The volume of water pouring downstream from a massive catchment area, swollen by snowmelt and aggravated by tidal surge from the mouth of the Tay, exposes Perth to sudden inundation. At Smeaton's Bridge, the major crossing to the town, the ravages of previous floods have been methodically recorded.
So we have the big inundation of 1814. That's the mark here. The water level actually got up to this height. That was the big flood. Yeah, that's the worst recorded episode. We have some more recent ones. For example, we have 14th of December 2006 and the 1993 flood that we had actually reached this level here. It's a fair height when you see exactly how high up this would be going compared to these properties there.
I mean, that would have flooded the road here and would have flooded those houses over there.
Yeah.
So the 93 flood, the water was up to here,
Yeah.
And the water was pouring in.
All of these properties, the basement areas, would have been absolutely inundated at that particular time.
It doesn't look like a floodgate, does it?
No, the design is such that it's supposed to blend in nicely with the sandstone walls, and it's just aesthetically pleasing as a floodgate could be under the circumstances. Would you like to have a go at closing one of these gates?
Well, the small boy in me would love to close a floodgate, yeah.
There's a fair weight in it, and once we close them, as you can see, the rubber seals would make contact with the metal plinth along here. Okay?
Yeah. You wouldn't want to shut your fingers in it, would you?
No, I think you might lose a few. Here we are.
Blimey.
London has the Thames Barrier. Perth has 81 barriers to protect its land and its people, and perhaps its future ambitions as a city.
You could walk through Perth and miss every one of those floodgates. They're disguised, they're discreet. If one of them does catch your eye, it's a reassuring reminder. Don't worry about the river, it says. We've contained the beast.
Towns habitually go with the flow, adapt to their changing environment and times. The way they work and look is shaped in part by that continuous engine of change, progress, the never-ending demand for a better standard of living and a more resilient economy. But progress can be brutal. Perth had a medieval wall until the Georgians pulled it down in the 18th century. Now the city hall is under threat. Towns evolve in fits and starts, and sometimes the fits can be explosive.
Throughout the 18th century, an influential group of families were controlling affairs in Perth. They were known as the Beautiful Order because, as one Edinburgh wit put it, they'd got everything here so beautifully stitched up. Wealthy, powerful, they took it on themselves to change the public face of this somewhat architecturally chaotic town by the Tay.
The look they were after had already transformed Edinburgh and Bath. Now, Georgian architecture reclothed Perth. Influenced by classical ideas, it was elegant, understated, ordered. Here, it was the vision of one man above all, Thomas Anderson. Anderson meticulously planned the expansion of the town, acquiring land and developing the sites.
This remarkable document is the McFarlane map of 1792, and it shows everything that Thomas Anderson had planned. Here to the north of medieval Perth is a mathematical grid of streets, lines on this map. He says what they mean down here in the key. The black and dotted lines are the new intended streets, which when finished will make Perth one of the most delightful towns in Europe. It's a big urban dream, and so is the scale of it. Anderson's new town was going to more than double the size of Perth.
The man he chose to realise his vision was his son-in-law, Thomas Marshall. And one of the first streets Marshall built was Rose Terrace, named after his young wife, Anderson's daughter Rose. Anderson imposed strict conditions for Rose Terrace, which set the tone for the whole of Georgian Perth.
If you bought a plot of land on Rose Terrace, you had to build on it within 2 years. The house you constructed had to be of stone with an ashlar, a squared stone front. It had to have a roof of blue slate, and it also had to be the same colour as all the other houses in the street. It was also compulsory that it should consist of a vault, a ground floor, 2 upper stories, and garrets.
Each householder on Rose Terrace was also given land behind their property, but there were strings attached to this too. Gardens were not to be used for the making of soap, candles, glass or vitriol, nor for boiling yarn, slaughtering or coppersmithing, nor for a chemistry's laboratory. Basically, nothing that would upset the neighbours.
Anderson was prescribing a new urban order. His Georgian development wasn't going to look like anything Perth had ever seen before. The higgledy-piggledy buildings that had contributed to the shape of the town for centuries were old. Anderson's was a new town, disciplined, clean, a model of urban civilization.
All towns have a regional magnetism, drawing people and goods inward to markets, shops and businesses. Towns are economic and cultural hubs, places where people mingle. And in the centre of this magnetic town, people seem drawn to one meeting place in particular. This is the Harrods of Perth, McEwan's. This is the shop that brought French couture to Perth in the 1860s and put on some very stylish window displays. You came here for the latest fashion, the latest gossip. It was a meeting place, a hub. McEwan's brought the country crowd to town. Although the heyday of town department stores is long past, the clientele here still seem to come from far and wide. Could I ask where you've both come from?
Five. I come from Dunfermline.
So how far away is that from Perth?
23 miles. 23 and I'll be about 30.
Where do you come from?
Tillycoot. It's 9 miles from still.
That's a long way.
Yeah.
You look as if you're having a family gathering here. Where have you all come from?
Well, we're from Perth and Mark's from down south.
Okay. How often do you come to McEwan's?
Probably once a month, once every 2 months for lunch or coffees.
And how often do you come to McEwan's?
3 times. Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday.
And how many years have you been doing that for?
Oh, I have 17 years. Of course, I've got a free bus pass.
Well, actually, I used to work here 20 years ago as a waitress when I was at school. So, and Anne was my boss 20 years ago. And also before that, my grandparents used to come. So I've been coming here since I was a small child. So 30 odd years ago.
So you're the 3rd generation in your family to be coming to McEwan's for lunch?
Yeah.
Well, I'll let you get on with your lunch.
All right, thank you.
Sorry for interrupting. Bye-bye. How long have you been manager here, Anne?
I've worked in McEwan's for 35 years, so for most of that time I have been the manager on and off up in the restaurant, yes.
You seem to know everybody by their first names.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's quite a core for the store, this. We know all the customers that come in on Saturdays and Mondays and their families and everything. We have a few generations that, use the restaurant, so yes, we know them quite well.
McEwan's proves that Perth is really a town, not a city. Knowing all your customers by name, seeing families grow up as generations pass through your store. That's warm-hearted town life, the opposite of city anonymity. As a town, Perth can enjoy the best of both worlds, being as intimate as a village and as cosmopolitan as a city. There's another side to being a thriving hub. Successful towns are consumer hotspots. Along with all of that buying, selling and satisfying consumption, there's a lot of waste creation. And in Perth, that means grampians of garbage. 45,000 inhabitants are putting stuff in their bins every day. The only way a town handles so much waste is by investing in systems which export the rubbish elsewhere. But this town has always been clever with its rubbish.
In the Middle Ages, waste was organic. People in towns gathered their muck and their rubbish outside their houses in private middens, like compost heaps. Once it had rotted down a bit, they carted it away to use as manure in their share of the town's fields.
By the 1450s, with more people in the town and fewer people growing their own food, you begin to find references to the middens becoming a nuisance and an obstacle in the streets.
Middens that were not being regularly cleared were auctioned off. Farmers from outside town competed to buy the rich waste. They used it as fertiliser on their crops, and come market day, the produce it helped to grow was brought back into town. So town and country fed each other.
It was perfect recycling, and that legacy continues today.
What rubbish is it we're collecting this morning?
Basically, it's bottles, what have the tops on them, papers, tin cans.
And so that's all the stuff that actually goes up to be turned into other products?
42%.
What, Perth's rubbish?
Yeah.
42%?
42%.
That's a lot.
That is a lot.
It is impressive that Perth recycles 42% of its waste. That's a lot more than Glasgow, Birmingham or London. The success of a recycling scheme depends on the attitudes of householders, council support and a competent infrastructure. Perth seems to tick all the boxes.
And are people quite disciplined about separating?
Oh, they're very disciplined. Very. I mean, you just need to look in. There we go, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Papers, see? There we go, newspapers. That's it. As long as the tops aren't on it.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So that's a really diligent householder.
Oh, is that?
Yeah.
We're spot on with that one.
Perhaps a town is better placed to deal more effectively with our rubbish than a city. There seems to be a great pride in keeping the place clean and efficient, and everything is on a much more manageable scale. All the waste we've spent the morning collecting, the bottles, the aluminium cans, the paper and the cardboard, is taken to a processing site just outside the town.
Reclamation facility that we use. You can see the digger dropping the stuff into the hopper. It gets sent to this machine here, where it all gets separated out. The steel cans are separated using magnets. You can see the big pile of steel cans here. All the different materials that we separate, each get sent off to different reprocessors throughout the UK. Who'll each recycle these things back into new materials. Steel cans, for example, can be recycled over and over and over again, and a recycled steel can is of just as good quality as a virgin one, so great thing to do. And all the other bits and pieces the men actually sort by hand, so they're physically sorting out the paper from the cardboard and the bottles from the other bits and pieces.
It's not a dump so much as a factory.
Absolutely, yeah.
I really enjoyed my morning with the bin crew, but it turns out that picking through the rubbish is not as straightforward as it looks. Up on the picking line, there are two fast-moving conveyor belts. The first pickers are there to grab the biggest chunks of paper and card. The next team of pickers have to separate the tins and plastic. But concentrating on all the rubbish passing by is like looking out of a car's side window, trying to focus on every passing verge side detail while travelling at 70 miles an hour.
So, Graham, how long do you spend on the picking line before you go mad?
That's a hard one.
Doesn't it do your head in because just watching this stuff come by, it makes your eyes go peculiar?
You actually get used to it after a while. The first 2 or 3 days, it's more like motion sickness, sea sickness.
Yeah, I'm starting to feel dizzy already. Is it difficult to find people to work on the picking line?
It is. Most of them last 2 or 3 weeks. Some have lasted as short as a day.
Really?
Because of the motion in it all the time, Trying to get your eyes to focus on different things coming down.
This is really, really horrible. I'm feeling quite sick. It's the continual readjustment of your eyes, trying to refocus them the whole time on new rubbish coming through. It's not a nice job.
Recycling glass, paper, steel, aluminium uses a lot less energy than it takes to create these products from scratch. Making new paper, everything from felling trees to pulping and pressing the wood, that uses 65% more energy than recycling paper. Manufacturing new aluminium goods produces 95% more carbon dioxide than recycling old aluminium objects. Everything recycled in Perth goes on to be made into new materials within the UK. The glass goes to Alloa in Scotland, the paper to North Wales, cardboard to Glasgow, steel and aluminium to the Midlands. Perth is a champion of recycling. The drive to regain city status has given this town a tangible energy, and that energy is attractive. People want to move here. But the town, like the old banks of the Tay, has its limits. What happens when a town runs out of space? There's only so far Perth itself can expand. The town has grown up on the west side of the river. On the east side, development is blocked by Scone Palace and its land, by the steep slopes of Kinnoull Hill, and by some very exclusive private estates. Not much room for affordable housing there. If the town keeps expanding to the west, then it risks becoming severed from its centre. Its historic riverside heart will end up on the edge of town. But Perth might just become a city by stealth.
The council proposes that the rising population should spill into the nearby small villages. There are plans to build 4 entirely new communities within a 5-mile radius of the town at Bridgeverne, Armonbank, Bertha Park and just west of Perth.
Of course, this level of development would have a knock-on effect. You can't build 2,000 new homes without planning for the extra traffic. To ease that pressure, a new bypass is proposed, together with a new bridge over the Tay. As a town, Perth can only grow so far. As a city, it would absorb its hinterland. It would begin to eat further into its surrounding countryside. Tonight, Perth has taken to the streets to celebrate the 800th anniversary of the document that confirmed its status as a royal borough. It's the closest thing to a city charter that Perth's ever had. It's below zero, a freezing November night, but the people of Perth have turned out in their thousands. This is the kind of civic exuberance you see on the Thames or above the roofs of Edinburgh. Talk about sky-high ambition. Perth wants to be seen as a city. But the only person who can officially grant Perth her desperately desired city status is Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, and Perth is doing its best to be noticed.
There's no royalty here tonight, but I'm sure Her Majesty will hear about it. What a night!